In America today, we are literally dying to get high. If trends continue, and there's no reason to believe they won't, more than 65,000 people will die from drug overdoses this year, the vast majority from opioids. That's more than 150 people every day. It's more than traffic fatalities or American casualties in the Vietnam War. And behind every death, a family looking for answers and sometimes for justice. This is just one of those stories. There are streets where everyone knows why the strangers show up. Houses where people roll in and no one stays too long. This stretch of 3rd Street in North Minneapolis, tucked against Interstate 94, is one of those streets where people come looking to score heroin.
Well, this is one of the places that I knocked on.
Bob Bloomberg is also here looking to settle a score.
I go to those houses that they pointed out. I've knocked on the door. Scary people answer those doors. And I just come right out. I mean, I'm stupid, but I'm blunt. Hey, you sell drugs here? Because my daughter died right over there, and I'd like to know if she got them from here.
It was a frigid Friday afternoon, a few days after last Christmas, that neighbors noticed 2 people unconscious in a running car. A neighbor called 911. When police finally arrived 4 hours later, they found Jessica Bloomberg and her roommate, Blake Thompson, both dead from an apparent heroin overdose.
Somebody could have showed up with a couple of hits of Narcan for both of these kids. They'd still be alive. But they sat. And this has struck me in my heart now. And I need to know. I want to know where she got her stuff. And I want to know who gave it to her.
Why is that important?
My little girl was maybe on the wrong side of the tracks, but I think she was trying to get to the right side.
Blake Thompson's father is also looking for answers, but not on 3rd Street.
Honestly, if it weren't that drug dealer, it would have been a different one. If it weren't that one, it would have been another one. I wanted to be caught too, so I could bring my son back.
Blake and Jessica were 2 of the last people to die in 2017 from an opioid overdose, but they were hardly alone. Using data provided by the Hennepin County Medical Examiner, the Fox 9 investigators looked at 652 fatal opioid overdoses in the last 3 years. The majority of those deaths, 63%, involved a cocktail of drugs that included opioids. 12% were from heroin alone. 29 people died, about 4% of the total, from fentanyl, the drug that killed Prince. Tracking where people died, hot zones begin to emerge. Some of them are obvious, like hospitals. But you can find several overdoses along the 28th Street corridor in South Minneapolis, just off the Greenway, where drug dealing is common. And there are hot spots in North Minneapolis, too, including where Jessica and Blake died. There was another fatal overdose around the corner, one more a couple blocks away. And for Blake Thompson, this wasn't his first time on 3rd Street. Looking at Google Maps Street View, his parents believe that's the green Saturn Blake was driving a couple years ago, a few hundred feet from where he died.
Were you worried about Blake?
No more than I ever was.
Blake's addiction began a few years ago, his father says, with a horrific car accident and an aftermath of painkillers. 75% of all heroin users begin with pain meds. In a few months, Blake's pills were gone. The pain was not. And Blake was always asking for money.
I don't know if you know this, but $40 is the magic number.
$40, the cost of a fix.
You, I, my wife, we can't stop one person from doing it because the addiction is too strong. And there needs to be something done about that.
What is that?
I don't know. I scratch my head every night trying to figure out what that might be. I've got 3 other kids that are struggling with this.
You heard him right. He has 3 other adult kids struggling with opioid addiction. But Blake's death was a wake-up call.
There was a time where I just gave up. And I said, I can't do anything about this. So since the funeral, since the death, I've kind of came up to the realization that don't give in, but don't give up.
You were the bad guy.
I was always the bad guy. Yep.
Bob Bloomberg never gave in, and he admits it drove him and his daughter apart. He says he could always tell when Jessica was high, that look in her eyes, and he never let it slide.
I'm petrified that something's going to happen to you. Come home. And she said, don't call me again, and she hung up on me.
He learned the heartbreaking truth about Jessica after her death, cleaning out the apartment she shared with Blake and a boyfriend. He discovered heroin, cocaine, scales for weighing drugs, and bottles of painkillers. Also a note from the boyfriend saying he went out looking for Jessica and Blake and was worried. And then there were the videos on Jessica's phone showing all of them getting high.
You think police just handled this as another overdose death?
I know that they did.
And you think there's something else going on?
I know, I completely believe that, yes.
Minneapolis police consider this case to be an accidental drug overdose. But the case is not officially closed, not yet, because it's connected to another ongoing narcotics investigation. Minneapolis police won't say more than that. But going after the drug dealer for the deaths of Blake and Jessica would not be easy in this case because of something else very unusual.
It wasn't just the heroin that killed Jessica and Blake. The medical examiner also found high levels of carbon monoxide. Come to find out, there was a leak allowing the exhaust to come in through the trunk. If the heroin hadn't killed them, the carbon monoxide would have.
I think they got high and passed out, and the carbon monoxide ultimately killed them.
As much as I want to say Jessica was an angel who was just in a really bad circumstance, Jessica walked down this path on her own. No one put a gun to her head and said, snort this heroin, that might kill you. She did that on her own.
But you believe there's some responsibility for the people who gave her those drugs?
Yes, I do.
But there's little indication a tough-on-crime approach is working with the opioid epidemic. Only 38 drug dealers have been convicted of murder in the last decade in Minnesota. In the Prince case, investigators spent 2 years trying to figure out who supplied him with the counterfeit painkillers. And they still came up empty.
Why do you keep coming back?
To see where she died. Right now, this is the only closure I really have.
It is tempting to be haunted by the what-ifs. What if police had arrived sooner? What if there wasn't a leak in the car? Or the heroin wasn't so strong? 5 months after Jessica and Blake were found in that car, two fathers are still struggling to find answers. Not just on 3rd Street, but in their own lives.
That means that when they call me and ask me for $40, I got to know what that $40 is for. And if it's sketchy, I'll just go pay that fine, or I'll go turn that phone back on.
I showed you pictures of what she looks like when she's using, but that's what she looks like when she's not. She was a beautiful girl.
And you may be wondering why it took Minneapolis police 4 hours to respond to the initial 911 call. A Minneapolis police spokesperson tells us the officers initially dispatched were delayed responding to another call. And get this, paramedics don't respond to such calls until they get an all clear from police. Finally, if you are looking for help for an opioid addiction or have a loved one who is, we have information about treatment options at the Fox 9 app. For the Fox 9 investigators, I'm Tom Lydon.